I've told this story maybe 4 times in my life. Twice to my wife. Once to a doctor who was trying to work out why I couldn't sleep. And once, badly, at a pub in Camden, to a man I'd never met because he'd said something stupid about soldiers and I couldn't let it go. This is the 5th time. And I want to get it right because I don't think I got it right the other 4. I was 23. I sold cameras. That's the thing nobody expects when I start. They think I'm going to say I was a copper or a medic or something with weight to it. No. I sold cameras in a shop off Piccadilly, the kind of shop that doesn't exist anymore, with a glass counter and a man named Rowan who'd worked there since 1979, and who could tell you the difference between 2 lenses by the sound they made when you turned the focus ring. And on that Tuesday, I was standing on a footpath about 200 meters from a man in a red tunic and a bearskin cap, and I watched him not move. That's the whole story, really. He didn't move. But it took me 20 years to understand what that meant. Let me put you there first. That's the part people skip, and it's the part that matters. It was the 2nd week of September, and London was doing that thing it does where it can't commit. Not summer anymore. Not autumn yet. Warm enough that the tourists were still in shirt sleeves, cool enough that the wind coming up from the park had an edge to it, and you'd get these gusts that would lift the loose grit off the pavement and throw it at your ankles. The sky was the color of a dirty bedsheet, flat, low. That gray London does where there's no cloud you can point at, just gray, all of it, like someone had put a lid on. I remember because I'd said something to Rowan that morning about how you could photograph anything on a day like that, and it had come out looking like a funeral. He'd laughed. He had this laugh, sort of a wheeze, 40 years of cigarettes in it. He said, "That's the point, son. That's why the good ones come here." I was on my lunch. 45 minutes, and I always spent it walking because the shop had no windows to speak of, and by noon I'd start feeling like something in a jar. I'd walk down through Green Park sometimes. Sometimes I'd cut over toward Hyde Park Corner and just stand about, watch things. I liked watching the guard. I wasn't a tourist about it. I'd grown up in London, I'd seen it 1,000 times. But there's something about it, isn't there, when you've seen it 1,000 times. You stop seeing the costume and you start seeing the person. And the thing I'd noticed over months of lunches was that they were bored. Some of them. You could tell. There's a specific quality to a young man standing still who does not want to be standing still, and once you've spotted it, you can't unspot it. The tiny shifts. The way the eyes go somewhere far away. This one wasn't like that. I don't know his name. I want to be clear about that because I've had people ask and I've had people assume I'm holding it back for some reason, and I'm not. I never learned it. In the days after, the papers ran a photo and there were names in circulation, and I never chased it. It felt like it wasn't mine to chase. So in my head, he's just been the boy, which is stupid because he wasn't a boy. He was probably my age, maybe younger. He was on a stone-flagged section near a set of black railings, at a corner of a road that ran up along the edge of the park. There was a little raised step he stood on. Sentry box behind him, and slightly left, one of those tall ones, painted, with the arch over the top. And he stood properly. That's the only way I can put it. Rifle at his side, boots together, chin level. Not rigid, that's what people get wrong when they imagine it. Rigid is what you do when you're fighting your body. This was different. He'd found some place inside the stillness where he could rest. I remember thinking, that's a skill. That's a skill nobody gives you credit for. There was a family in front of him. Dutch, I think. I'd heard the language, and I'd worked in the shop long enough to know Dutch when it went past. Mum, dad, 2 kids. A girl of about 9 and a boy who couldn't have been more than 5. The little boy was doing the thing. You know the thing. Marching back and forth in front of the guard with his arms swinging, going hup, 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 glancing up every 3 steps to see if he'd got a reaction. He hadn't, obviously. And the dad was laughing and taking photos, and the mum was saying something to the boy in a warning tone, and the boy was ignoring her completely the way 5-year-olds do, and the sister was standing off to the side with her arms crossed, mortally embarrassed in the way only a 9-year-old girl can be about a younger brother. Ordinary, that's what I need you to understand. It was so ordinary. There was a hot dog cart about 30 meters off. Bloke running, it had the radio on some phone-in show. Two men arguing about football, the signal going in and out. There was a pigeon on the railings doing that thing pigeons do where they look at you like they're considering something. A woman in a red coat was on the phone, walking fast, saying, "No, no, that's not what I," over and over. Traffic, buses, that constant low London hum that you don't hear until it stops. I bought a coffee I didn't want, just to have something to hold. And I stood there and I watched the little Dutch boy march, and I thought about how the guard's eyes weren't moving, and I thought, genuinely, this was my whole thought, I wonder what he had for breakfast. That's it, that was the last normal thought I had that day. The bang. Everybody asks about the bang. They want it described. And I've tried, and I can't do it properly, so I'll just tell you what my body did, because that's more honest than trying to find a word for the sound. It came from behind me and to the left, up the road, maybe 200–250 meters, somewhere past the junction out of sight. And my body dropped before my brain did anything at all. I don't mean I ducked. I mean I was down, on the pavement, on one knee and one hand, coffee gone, and I have no memory whatsoever of deciding to do that. There's a gap. There's a bang, and then there's me on the ground with grit in my palm and no bridge between the two. The sound wasn't a bang the way a firework is a bang. It was, you felt it in your chest first, in your sternum, like being shoved from the inside. And then the noise arrived, and the noise was enormous and flat and wrong, and it had a sort of crunch inside it, like the sky had a bone in it and the bone broke. Then a half second of absolutely nothing. And then the world came apart. Glass, that's what I heard next. Glass, everywhere all at once, not one window, but every window on that stretch going together. A sound like a wave breaking made entirely out of knives. And then the falling glass sound after, which somehow was worse, because it went on and on. Car alarms, 6, 8, 10 of them, all in different keys. And underneath it, and this is the bit I'd give a lot to be able to unhear, the screaming started, and it started late. There was a delay. 2 seconds, maybe 3, where everyone was just too shocked to make a noise, and then all at once everyone did. I got up. I don't know why I got up. Everything sensible in me said stay down. The air had changed. There was a smell, chemical, sharp, like the back of a fireworks shop, but also like burning hair, also like hot dust. And I could taste it. That's the thing they never say, you can taste it. It goes in your mouth and it sits there. And there was a wall of it coming up the road. Not smoke exactly. Dust. A gray-brown wall of pulverized something rolling up the street toward the junction, and I remember it looked slow. It looked almost gentle, the way it came, and I stood there staring at it like an idiot for one whole second before instinct kicked back in. People were running past me, loads of them. A man with blood on his face running. A woman carrying one shoe. Someone's dog going the other way, lead trailing. Everything in the world was in motion. And I turned around. I don't know what made me turn around. I've thought about it. Maybe part of me had already registered something in the corner of my eye and hadn't processed it yet. Maybe I just wanted to see how far away I could get. I don't know. But I turned around, and I looked back toward the railings. And the boy in the red tunic was standing exactly where he had been. Exactly the same, the rifle at his side, the boots together, the chin level. He had not moved. I want to explain what that looked like, in that moment, in that light, with all of that happening. Everything else in my field of vision was chaos. And chaos has a texture. It's all diagonal lines and blur, and people at wrong angles and things where they shouldn't be. There was a bin over. There was a bicycle in the road with the front wheel still spinning and nobody near it. There was paper, hundreds of sheets of paper from somewhere, just up in the air, turning over and over, drifting down slow, and it looked so beautiful and so obscene at the same time that I nearly laughed. And in the middle of all of that, there was this one vertical line. One straight thing. Red tunic, black cap, absolutely still. He was the only thing in London holding its shape. Now here's what I got wrong at the time, and it took me years to fix, so I'll say it plain. I thought he was in shock. I honestly did. My first thought seeing him standing there was, that poor bastard's frozen. Because I'd read about it, hadn't I? Everyone's read about it. People go rigid, they lock up. The body just refuses. And I thought that's what this was. I thought I was watching a young man whose mind had shut the door. And there was a part of me, I'm not proud of this, a part of me that thought he's going to die there, standing up, because he can't make himself move. I nearly ran at him, to grab him, to pull him. I'm glad I didn't, because I'd have been wrong, and I'd have been in his way. The dust reached us about 4 seconds later. It came up the road and around the corner, and it went over the junction like weather. And everything went dim, not dark, dim, like someone had put a filter over the day, and the grit got in my eyes and my throat, and I doubled over coughing. When I could see again, sort of, squinting, half-blind, the world had gone a strange sepia color. Everything the color of old photographs. People moving through it like ghosts. And he was still there. But now, and this is the first thing that made me start to understand, now the dust had settled on him. His tunic wasn't red anymore. It was a sort of dusty rose. There was a gray layer on his shoulders, on the cap, along the barrel of the rifle. He looked like a statue. He looked like something that had been standing on that spot for 200 years. And his eyes were moving. That's when I knew. His eyes were moving, small, controlled, left and back, sweeping the ground in front of him, not panicking, not darting, working. He wasn't frozen at all. He was watching. The Dutch family. Oh God, the Dutch family. They'd been thrown not by the blast, we were too far for that, but by people. The crowd had gone through them like water through a fence. The mum was on the ground about 10 meters from where she'd been. The dad had got up already and he was screaming, and his face was, I'd never seen a face like that. It's not what you think. It's not dramatic. It goes slack. Terror makes a face go slack and hollow, and it makes a grown man look like a child. He was screaming a name. The little girl was up. She was up and she was clinging to her mother's arm, and she was fine. She was fine. She was just screaming. The little boy was gone. I saw it maybe a second before the guard did. Maybe, I've never been sure. The boy had been knocked over near the base of the railings, and he'd done what small children do when everything goes wrong, which is he'd curled up. He was tucked in against the bottom of the railings, right down on the flags, arms over his head, and he was so small and so low, and the dust was so thick that you could genuinely, easily not see him. And the crowd was still coming. That's the part people don't get about a stampede. It's not one wave. It's waves. The first surge goes past, and then there's a gap, and then there's another one, because the people further back have only just started running, and they're running harder because they've had longer to be frightened. And the second surge was coming up the pavement, straight at the railings, straight at where that little boy was curled up on the ground. And he was going to be trampled, not maybe, was, 20, 30 people at a dead run in dust you couldn't see through. I was too far. I want to be very clear about that, because I've spent a lot of years being clear about that with myself. I was 15 meters away with a crowd between us. I could not have got there. It was not possible. I still dream about it being possible. The guard moved. And here is the thing I've never been able to make anyone properly understand. The thing that made me start crying in a doctor's office 19 years later when I finally tried to explain it. He didn't run. He didn't panic run. He didn't scramble. He came down off that step, and he crossed the ground with the most extraordinary economy I have ever seen in a human being. 3 strides, maybe 4, every single one of them landing exactly where he'd meant it to land, in a dust cloud on a surface covered in broken glass, with people coming at him from the front. He'd already worked out where his feet were going before he took the first step. He'd been standing there for 10 seconds? 12. And in that time, while I was on my knees losing my coffee and thinking he was frozen, he had already looked at the ground, found the child, mapped the route, and decided. That wasn't shock. That was the most intense 5 seconds of thinking I have ever been near. He got to the boy and he went down on one knee, not both, and I remember noticing that even then, because it meant he could get up again fast, and he got the child under him. Not scooping him up, not lifting him, under. He put his own body over that little boy like a roof. Back to the crowd, head down. One arm braced against the railings, one arm around the child, and the rifle laid down flat on the stone where it couldn't hurt anyone. He put the rifle down. I've thought about that more than almost anything else. That he had the presence of mind, in the middle of all of it, to think about what a rifle on the ground might do to a running crowd, and to lay it down flat and clear. And then the second surge hit him. Bodies, just bodies, off him and around him and over him. I watched a man in a suit go straight into his back at full speed and bounce. I watched someone else stumble over his boots and go down and get up and keep going. Somebody's bag caught him across the side of the head and knocked the bearskin half off, and he didn't reach up to fix it. He just braced. Wider, lower, absorbing it. And I could see through the gaps, through the dust. I could see the little boy's hands. That's all I could see of him. 2 little hands, white with dust, gripping the front of that filthy red tunic like it was the last solid thing in the world. And it was. That was the whole point. It was. I don't know how long it lasted, 10 seconds, 20, it felt like an hour. The crowd thinned, the way water does. And when it had gone past, he stayed down for another few seconds, checking, I think, listening for more, and then he lifted his head. And he looked around. And he found the father, who was on his hands and knees 15 feet away in the dust, still screaming that name. And the guard didn't shout. He didn't wave. He just turned the child slightly so the father could see him, and then he held very still. Like, here he is, come and get him. And the father made a noise I have never heard before or since, and will not attempt to reproduce. And he came across that ground on all fours, and the guard passed him his son. Passed, not handed. Passed him carefully with 2 hands, checking the grip before he let go, like you'd pass someone something precious over a fence. And then he stood up. He picked up his rifle. He knocked the worst of the dust off the front of his tunic with the flat of his hand, twice, quick, like a man tidying himself before a job interview. And he walked back to that step. And he stood on it. And he came back to attention. I've thought about that final part for 20 years, and I still can't tell you exactly what it did to me. Because in one sense it's ridiculous. It's an absurd thing to do. There's a bomb gone off. There's blood on the road. There is nothing to guard. There is nothing left to be ceremonial about. And this young man walks back to his mark and stands to attention with a dead gray face and a child's dust handprints on his chest. I thought it was madness. I remember thinking this, and I'm ashamed of it. I thought, what is he doing? What is he doing? It doesn't matter anymore. But it did matter. And I didn't understand why until the ambulances came, and then I understood. Because when the first responders came up that road, and they came fast, faster than I'd have believed, sirens layering over each other, the whole junction was chaos. Nobody knew anything. Nobody knew where to go. Nobody knew who was hurt. People were wandering. People were sitting down in the road. People had gone into that flat, glassy silence that comes after. And the one fixed point in the entire scene. the one thing in that whole gray ruined street that was exactly where it was supposed to be, was him. I watched a paramedic run past 6 other people and go straight to him, because he was the only thing there that looked like it knew what was happening. And he pointed. That's all, he pointed, one arm straight out up the road toward where it was worst. And they went. I sat down on the curb. I don't remember choosing to. My legs just stopped agreeing to hold me, and I ended up on the curb with my back against a bollard, and I looked at my hands and they were shaking so hard I couldn't have used them for anything. There was a woman next to me, older. She'd been in the crowd. She had a cut above her eyebrow and she was bleeding into her eye and she didn't seem to have noticed. She was holding a shopping bag with both hands like she was on a bus. She said, "Is it over?" And I said, "I don't know." And she said, "I think it's over." And then neither of us said anything for a very long time. The dust settled slow. It took ages. It hung in the air and it came down like snow, and after a while there was a layer of it on everything, on the road, on the cars, on us. Gray, everything gray. And through it red. One red thing still there. Still standing. He'd been on that step for maybe 20 minutes since the blast, and he stood there for another 2 hours after that, because nobody had come to relieve him, and he was not going to leave a post he had not been relieved from. I know it was 2 hours because I stayed. I don't know why I stayed either. I couldn't leave. Every time I thought about getting up and walking away, it felt obscene, like walking out of a church halfway through. So I sat on that curb with a stranger's blood-spotted shopping bag next to me, and I watched a 20-something-year-old man stand absolutely still for 2 hours in the aftermath of a bomb. And I understood, slowly in pieces, the way you understand hard things. That I had been wrong about literally everything I had ever thought about what he was doing there. I need to back up. Because to tell you what I understood sitting on that curb, I have to tell you what I'd believed before, and I have to be honest about it, and it's not flattering. I'd thought it was theater. That's the truth. 23 years old, born in London, walked past those sentries 100 times, and if you'd asked me at any point before that Tuesday what they were for, I'd have given you some smirking answer about the tourist board. Men dressed up as toy soldiers for the photographs. A bit of pageantry. Nice hats. I'd have said the stillness was a trick, a performance of discipline. Standing still is easy, isn't it? Anyone can stand still. I genuinely thought that. And then I watched a man stand still in a way that saved a child's life, and I've never been able to think anything so stupid again. Here's what I got wrong. I thought the stillness was the absence of action. It's not. It's the opposite. The stillness is where the action is stored. He didn't move when the bomb went off, and I read that as frozen. But he wasn't frozen. He was not wasting movement. Every single person on that street reacted to that blast by doing something useless. I got down on my knees. The woman in the red coat ran the wrong way. The man with the hot dog cart tried, I swear to God, to fold up his umbrella. We all did something immediately, and none of it was any good, because none of us had looked first. He looked first. That's all. That's the entire difference. He held still for 10 seconds and he looked, and because he looked, he saw a 5-year-old boy tucked in under a railing that nobody else on that street had seen. 12 seconds of not moving, and a child went home. And I've thought about what that costs. Because it's not a nice skill, is it? Nobody's born with it. You do not naturally, as a mammal, respond to an enormous explosion by standing perfectly still and doing a careful visual sweep of your surroundings. Every cell in your body is screaming at you to go. To get low, get away, get out. That is the oldest instruction in the human animal, and it is written in every part of you. And he told it no. Not once. He'd have had to tell it no about 40 times in those 10 seconds, over and over, as the dust came and the screaming started and the glass fell. No, not yet, look. No, not yet, look. That's not the absence of fear. I want to say that as clearly as I know how, because I think people find it comforting to imagine these men don't feel it, and it lets us off the hook. He was terrified. I know he was, because I saw his face when it was over. When he came back to attention and the dust was on him and I was 15 feet away on that curb, and I looked up at him, and I saw his jaw. His jaw was going. Just slightly. This tiny tremor along the line of it, the only part of him that had got away. And his eyes were bright and wet and absolutely fixed on the middle distance, and he was holding, you could see him holding, and I understood that the stillness wasn't the absence of the storm. It was a man standing on top of one. The little boy was fine. I want to say that early in part 2, because I know what it's like to read something like this and be waiting for the drop. He was fine, bruised, cut on one knee. He'd swallowed a lot of dust and he was sick twice on the pavement while his mother held his forehead the way mothers do. That's it, that's the whole injury list. One knee and a bad memory. But the father is the part that finished me. Once the ambulances had come, and the family had been checked, and the little boy was on his mother's lap on the back step of a van with a blanket round him, the father came back. He came back across that junction, on his own, through the dust, and he walked up to the guard. And he stopped about a meter in front of him. And he didn't know what to do. You could see it. You could see this man, 40-odd, on holiday, in a country he didn't live in, standing in front of a young soldier in a filthy red coat, and he had no idea what the correct behavior was, because there isn't one. There's no protocol for this. Nobody teaches you what to do when a stranger has just put his own body over your son. He tried to speak, and nothing came out. He tried again. He said, and his English wasn't perfect, and it made it worse. It made it so much worse, he said. He is my only son. And that was all he could manage. That was the whole sentence. He'd meant it to be something else, you could tell. He'd meant it to be thank you, and what came out instead was this bare, terrible fact, like he was still explaining the stakes to someone who might not have understood them. He is my only son. And the guard did not move. Eyes front, chin level, absolutely still. Now, I've heard people be angry about that. I told this story once, and a woman told me she thought it was disgusting. That a man had come to say thank you and this soldier had ignored him, and that was exactly what was wrong with the whole institution, and where's the humanity, and so on. And I didn't argue with her, because I was younger then and I didn't have the words. I've got them now. He couldn't. That's what she didn't see. He couldn't have spoken to that man, not then, not right then, because he was holding himself together with about 4 strands of wire, and if he had opened his mouth he would have come apart in front of 100 people, and there was still glass in the road and a job to do, and nobody had come to relieve him. Do you understand? The stillness wasn't him withholding something. The stillness was the only thing keeping him upright. If he'd let go, if he had allowed himself, for 1 second, to be a human being who had just done that, who had just felt a child's hands grip his tunic while a crowd went over his back, he would have gone down on that pavement and he would not have got up. And then there'd have been one more body on the ground for the paramedics to step over. So he stood there. And the father stood in front of him. And the father, God, this is the bit the father understood. He looked at him for maybe 3 seconds, and something crossed his face, and he stopped trying to make the soldier respond. He just put his hand flat on his own chest, over his heart, and he held it there. And he stood in front of that guard in silence, with his hand on his heart, for about 10 seconds. And then he turned around and went back to his family. Nobody clapped. I want to make sure I say that. Because when I tell this in a pub, people expect applause. They want the crowd to break out in applause because that's how it goes in films. Nobody clapped. Nobody said anything. It was silent, and it was gray, and there was a smell in the air, and everybody who'd seen it just stood there feeling something enormous that they had no way to put anywhere. That's what real things are like. They don't have a soundtrack, they just sit on your chest. He was relieved at just after 4 o'clock. Two men came, sergeant and another soldier, and they came at a march proper, and I remember thinking even that was mad. The whole street's blown to bits, and here come two men marching in step down the middle of it. But it wasn't mad, I get it now. It was the opposite of mad. They halted. There was some business I didn't follow, a few words, some movement, and the new man took the post. And the boy in the dusty red tunic turned and marched off, and I watched him go all the way up to the corner. Perfect, every step of it perfect. And then he got to the corner, and he turned it, and the second he was out of sight of the road, his shoulders dropped. I saw it, just for a fraction of a second before he went behind the wall. The whole frame of him just went, like a coat coming off a hook. That was the only thing he let himself have. And then he was gone. I went back to work. I want to tell you that I did something noble, but I went back to work. I walked to the shop and it was shut. Obviously, everything was shut, and Rowan was standing outside on the pavement with the keys in his hand, and when he saw me, he didn't say anything. He just looked at me. And then he opened the door and put the kettle on and sat me down in the back and made me a cup of tea I didn't drink, and he sat with me for 2 hours without saying a word. Rowan, who'd been in the shop since 1979, and who could tell a lens by the sound of the focus ring. I only found out later that he'd been in Belfast in the 70s. He never told me. Somebody else told me, years after he died. He knew exactly what he was looking at when I walked through that door. And he made me a cup of tea, and he shut up. Now, the thing I actually want to say, the reason I'm telling you this at all. I have spent 20 years watching people misunderstand this story, and I've done it myself, and I want to try to fix it. We look at those men outside those palaces, and we think we're looking at a costume. And we're not. We're looking at a promise. That's all a sentry is. That's all he's ever been. It's a man standing in a place saying, this ground is held. Whatever happens, this ground is held. You can plan around me. You can navigate by me. I am the thing that will still be here. And on a normal Tuesday, that promise looks like nothing. It looks like a bloke in a hat being photographed by strangers. It looks silly. It looks like theater. But a promise doesn't mean anything on the days it's easy. A promise means something on the day the sky breaks. And here's what I've never been able to get past. He didn't do anything he wasn't supposed to do. That's the thing. Everyone wants a hero to do something extra, to go above and beyond, to break the rules for the greater good. That's the story we like, isn't it? The man who throws away the rule book. He didn't break a single rule. He held his post, he observed, he acted to protect a civilian, he secured his weapon, he returned to his post, he directed emergency services, he remained until relieved. That's it. Every single thing he did that day was, presumably, in some manual somewhere. There is probably a sentence in a training document that covers each of those actions. He was not extraordinary. He was exactly what he had promised to be. And it turns out that's the rarest thing in the world. I've thought a lot about the other people on that street, including me. We all thought we were decent. I'm sure we did. If you'd asked any of us the day before whether we'd help a child in danger, every single one of us would have said yes. Of course, obviously, what do you take me for? And then it happened. And I got down on my knees and lost my coffee. And a woman in a red coat ran the wrong way. And a man in a suit ran into a soldier who was shielding a 5-year-old and bounced off and kept going and did not stop. And I would bet everything I own does not know to this day what he ran into. We were all decent. We were all completely useless. Because decency isn't a feeling, it's a habit, and you cannot build a habit in the 4 seconds after a bomb. You have to have built it before. He'd built it before, on 1,000 boring mornings, standing in the cold with nothing happening, learning to hold, learning to look, learning to keep his weight even so his legs wouldn't buckle on hour 3. Every single one of those pointless-looking mornings was him putting something in the bank. And on that Tuesday he made the withdrawal, and it was all there, all of it, exactly where he'd left it. That's what discipline is. That's all it's ever been. It's not obedient, it's not marching, it's not shiny boots. It's a man building, in advance, a version of himself who will still be functional on the worst day of his life. Because the person you'll be that day is not the person you decide to be that day. It's the person you've been practicing. I never found out his name. I've been asked why I never tried, and the honest answer is that I did try once about 8 years after. I got as far as writing a letter and I never sent it. Because what would I have said? Hello, you don't know me. I was on the pavement. I sold cameras. I watched you save a child and I've thought about you every week for 8 years and I don't know what I want from you. What is he supposed to do with that? And there was something else, too. Something I've only recently been able to admit. I think I was frightened that he wouldn't remember it. Not because it didn't matter to him, but because I think, for men like that, it might not have been the biggest thing that ever happened. I think there's a real chance that if I'd found him and asked, he'd have thought about it for a second and said, "Oh, yeah, I remember that." And that would have destroyed me. Because it was the biggest thing that ever happened to me. It rearranged my entire understanding of what a person is. I've made every important decision of my adult life, in some corner of my head, by asking what a man in a dusty red coat would have done. And it might have just been a Tuesday to him. I got married, 2 kids, boy and a girl. The boy's 19 now, which is a number that does something to me I can't explain. I took him to see the guard when he was about 6, same as everyone does. And he did the thing. Marched up and down, arms swinging, looking up for a reaction and didn't get one, and turned round to me and said, in that outraged way small children have, "Dad, he's not doing anything." And I crouched down next to my son, and I looked at that young man standing there in the sun, bored out of his mind probably, thinking about his tea, and I said, "He's doing everything, mate." And my son said, "But he's just standing." And I said, "Yeah." And I couldn't say the rest. I couldn't. My throat closed up and I had to stand there for a bit and pretend I was looking at something. He's 19 now, my boy. The same age, near enough. And I look at him sometimes, leaving his shoes in the hall, on his phone, laughing at something with his mates. And I think about how somewhere out there is a man in his 40s who once put his back to a stampede for a stranger's child, who put his rifle flat on the ground because someone might trip on it, who stood at attention afterwards with dust in his eyes and a jaw that wouldn't quite hold still, and who then presumably went home and had his tea, and never told anybody. I go back sometimes, not often, once every few years. Everything's been rebuilt. You wouldn't know. There's new stone and new railings and the shops have changed hands twice and the hot dog cart's gone. And the sentry's still there. Different man, obviously. Different man every time they rotate through. And the tourists take their photographs, and the children march up and down, and everybody looks and nobody sees. And I stand at the back with my hands in my pockets, and I look at whoever's on that step, some lad who's probably thinking about absolutely nothing at all. And I think, I know what you are. Nobody here knows what you are. But I do. People ask me if I'm angry about it, that nobody knows, that there's no plaque, no medal, no name. I'm not. Because I think, and I might be wrong, I've been wrong before, I think if you'd found him afterwards and pinned something on his chest and made a fuss, he'd have hated it. I think he'd have gone red and looked at the floor and said something about how anyone would have done it. Which is not true, nobody else did. But he'd have said it. And that's why he's the one who did it. So that's my story. That's the whole thing. A bomb went off near Hyde Park on an ordinary Tuesday in September, and I was 200 meters away selling cameras, and I saw a man in a red coat stand absolutely still for 12 seconds while the world came apart. And in those 12 seconds, he saw what nobody else saw. And a 5-year-old boy from the Netherlands, who is now a man in his 30s and who almost certainly does not remember any of this, went home to his mother. Because someone had decided, long before that day, on some cold, pointless morning, when absolutely nothing was happening, that he was going to be the kind of man who holds. I've told this 5 times now. I think I got it right. If you're ever in London and you see one of them standing there, don't take the photograph straight away. Just stand for a minute. Just look. Because he isn't doing nothing. He is standing between you and the worst day of your life, on the chance that it comes. And the terrible, beautiful, unbearable thing about a man like that is that he'll never know if he was needed. And he'll stand there anyway.